Hi, everybody. Welcome to the CAI live webinar. Why can't we all just get along? Communication, cooperation, collaboration, and conflict resolution among our board and industry professionals. I'm Cathy Heitkemper. I'm a partner and co-chair of the HOA law practice at Tressler. I focus my practice on representing condo and homeowners associations for 16 years.
Hi, my name is Cathy Ryan. I'm the owner of Property Specialist, a privately held management company for over 45 years. I am the past president and treasurer of the CAI board, and I'm currently in my 8th year as a member of the CAI Finance Committee.
Hi, my name is Malkowski, and I serve on the board of the Woodland Townhome Owners Association in Antioch. And in the last 2 years, we've been very busy as a board because in May of 2018, we had a hailstorm, and all 18 buildings had damage to the roofs and siding. So we finished the roof project last year and are now working on replacing siding.
Hi, my name is Deborah, and I'm a regional director with FirstService Residential in the City Portfolio Department. I currently direct manage 5 properties and provide support to 4 managers and their 25 properties. I've been in property management since 2015 and with FirstService since 2016.
Hi, my name is Len Prange. I'm the board president of the 3470 Lakeshore Drive Condominium Association. When I retired about 50 years ago, when I retired after 50 years in financial management and operations, my wife suggested that I join the board of the association to give me something to do. Little did I know how much it was going to give me to do. We have a condo that's 28 stories, 62 units, and it's 50 plus years old. And my retirement has turned into almost a full-time job some days.
Thank you, everyone. All right, enough about us. We're excited that you joined us here today. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to add them to the questions box in the chat, and we will do our best to answer the questions the best we can throughout the presentation. So with that being said, let's get started. What we have done for this presentation is we have 4 areas that we want to focus on. We want to focus on communication, cooperation, collaboration, and conflict resolution. And CAI has been gracious enough to provide us with some questions that have come in from board members, from property managers over the last year that we think that that hopefully everyone has asked themselves at some point in time. So we are hopeful to be able to get to all of the questions that, we've been given, plus the ones that are coming in through the chat. So if there's anything that doesn't get addressed, I will make sure that at the end, it's circulated amongst us, and hopefully we can reach out and handle those questions individually. All right, so starting with communication, we have also given ourselves some subcategories within that. And the first one is the expectation of management's roles at board meetings. And specifically the question that was submitted is, should managers take minutes?
So I am, as I said, I direct manage 5 properties, and I do take minutes for a couple of those properties. I prefer the manager to take minutes because I am the trained professional in the room, and I know that I'm going to only capture what legal advises us to capture, and that is action items. I also like it because it helps me to pay attention to the meeting dialogue a little bit more. Everybody has a different format, a different style. I do ask my board to review my minutes prior to providing it to them and asking for an approval. Sometimes there's edits, sometimes they're not, but I prefer the manager to take the minutes.
I think from our standpoint at the board meetings, I think one of the questions has always been, how much should you put into the minutes? And as Deb pointed out, from a legal standpoint, I think you put in minutes that are related to motions, who made the motion, who seconded the motion, and what was it a unanimous decision? Was it, did somebody abstain? But as far as anything in terms of detailed discussion goes, we don't believe that's necessary, and that's the way we like to run our board meetings and set up the minutes.
Something else that comes up within that is whether or not you should have an outside minute taker. From the management perspective, Cathy, can you give us some thoughts on that?
My thought is, back in the day, we used to have all recording secretaries that were professionally brought in, especially if you have a contentious board. It's a third party who's got no axe to grind and will take them accurately. But I am too with Deb as far as taking motions only. As far as minutes go, less is more. That is your permanent record for your corporation.
Absolutely. I'm with you guys on that. All right. We have another subcategory that's come up, and we've captioned it, "Who is running the ship?" And actually, we have a question in the chat that actually goes exactly to this. So I am going to address it because it will take us into kind of the points that we would like to make. So the question that's been posed is, how do we handle a board member who acts independently rather than as a member of the board? Which is exactly what we mean about who's running the ship. Deb, can you give us some thoughts on that?
So, the board all has equal votes. So amongst your board members, there's technically not one person who has more authority than another board member. They're supposed to be a collaborative, cooperative group working together in the best interest of the association. So in my experience, when we have a board member that kind of goes rogue or off the reservation, it's important that the rest of the board members address that particular individual and make sure they understand that you're part of a team, and going off on your own and providing direction that may be conflicting what was already provided to your property manager or to other staff members is not an effective way to captain a ship. You need to have everybody rowing in the same direction at the same time for things to work. I have had an experience where we have had a board member that has taken it upon themselves to reach out to vendors and to do other things. And unfortunately, it really creates dissension amongst the rest of the board. It becomes very difficult for them to work together because the focus becomes on that one disruptive board member that's, dragging anchor behind everything.
Well, what you say is very well put, from the standpoint that if you have a board member who's off doing something on his own, who's contacting vendors, giving vendors instructions, trying to get vendors to do something, whether it be for that unit owner directly or some inquiry relative to what the board's doing, it does cause problems. We've had a scenario where we've wound up spending half of board meetings arguing with that particular board member over something that he has done or didn't do, and it really is disruptive. As far as the fact that the board is going in one direction, and if this particular board member is going in a different direction, then that's an ongoing problem, and it needs to be addressed.
So I'd like to add to that. Sorry, Deb.
No, you're good.
To add to that, it really behooves the board, the other board members need to take control as fellow homeowners and equal members of that board to say something to that rogue board member or president. It's not up to management always to arbitrate everything and make everything smooth. It has to come from within as well.
To add to that, Cathy, I would also encourage any manager that is running into this to have a discussion with association counsel, because there unfortunately sometimes could be legal repercussions with a rogue board member acting, saying that they're acting on behalf of the board and they're not. So make sure you do check in with your legal counsel to make sure that board member can be properly reined in without creating another negative circumstance for the board.
Yeah, and I can speak to that. I've actually sent letters to board, and I've sent it as a global email, right? It's sent to everybody. Everyone has the same fiduciary obligation to the rest of the owners, and acting, inconsistent with that is a problem. One of the questions that's been posed in the chat is the implication that, or I guess the illusion that the president makes all the decisions because of the one-person contact with management. And I know that that's something we wanted to discuss about, management taking its direction and taking its direction from the board. Doesn't come from the president. The president just happens to be the representative that's relaying the decision to management. So, Monica, if you can speak to how you communicate the board's directives to Cathy or whoever, whoever.
Yeah. Or in our case, gosh, why am I having a mental block? I can't remember. Sarah, yes. We have a wonderful property manager, Sarah. But, we write a lot of emails back and forth to each other when we need the opinions of other members of the board, like, okay, should we have an extra push for snow? Things like that. It doesn't always work absolutely smoothly because some people log on to email, every 5 minutes, and some don't log on until, once in the evening. So it can be difficult to get everybody on board if you have to make a decision quickly. But we try to do the best we can. And also, we vote on all, decisions that affect money, any projects. We always vote on that at a board meeting. We don't make those decisions independently.
It's important, too, to make sure that all the board members feel empowered to speak up in those situations. They all have an equal say, and it's difficult when we're doing things by Zoom. But when we were used to be in front of each other, it was very easy to read a board member's body language that maybe they weren't totally comfortable with that and felt like they voted in favor, even though they didn't want to, simply because they feel that what they have to say doesn't matter. So it's very important as managers to make sure that all our board members feel empowered to speak up and to speak their mind, because each board member brings something extremely valuable to the table in running the association.
In fact, this morning I was, I'm starting to work on the next newsletter. So this morning I was thinking about how, we're really missing that, not getting together as a group and having a cup of coffee and, just feeling comfortable with one another. So
soon, hopefully, right?
Soon,
hopefully.
Yes.
All right, transitioning into our next subtopic, we've got what we've categorized as too many cooks in the kitchen. So we get a lot of questions about how to handle sticky situations when board members seem to be acting out of line. We've talked about it a little bit. But again, this takes us to the reasoning behind why a single point of contact is needed and why sometimes it's acceptable to have exceptions. I know myself, I traditionally like to have one point of contact, but I have found myself in situations where I receive emails from 5 board members. I don't always like it, but it is, generally speaking, it is best to have a single point of contact, because that way we can ensure that the communication that's being directed is in fact the direction of the board. We don't ever want to give the illusion that it's, the board president acting rogue or whoever that point of contact may be. We've got some more questions about encouraging discussions, about making sure that they're always being done at the board level. And then we've also got uniformity and consistency in relaying authorizations. Len, can you speak to that a little bit? How do you guys handle that within your association?
Well, we have, maybe we're unique from the standpoint, we actually have a 9-person board. So in order to get around some of those problems, we have an executive committee that's made up of myself, the president, the vice president, secretary, and treasurer. And we meet once a week. We used to meet in person with our manager, property manager. Now we do it once a week on Zoom or WebEx or something of that nature. But there's a significant amount of communication between the 4 of us. And then if there's something that needs to be discussed amongst the rest of the board, we'll do that with emails. We also have a regular newsletter that goes out so all the unit owners know what's going on a monthly basis, when meetings are coming up, what things are being changed or promoted or whatever you want to call it. And it's kind of a scenario where it seems to work quite well for us. We as the executive committee will make decisions on expenditures that are outside the realm of what we would consider to be CapEx. So we have a maintenance problem, something of that nature, we'll make a decision on that. If there is in fact an emergency where we need to have a plumber come in, we need to have something happen on a really quick basis, then I'll do that as the board president. But again, then that's just relayed on to everybody else, because it's kind of a situation where you're not going to want to wait and have to get everybody together to decide something.
Exactly.
The executive committee setup, I will say, is fantastic. It really does expedite the association needs, where you don't have to wait for that board meeting to get something done. And the executive committee at 3470 they have a wide variety of life experience and expertise, and it really makes it a very collaborative, enjoyable process when we're making these decisions, for the building.
All right. So I have two questions in the chat, and one of them is kind of a one-off, but I think it's appropriate to address it here. So the question is, when running for a board seat, is it normal procedure to ask for ownership/deed to your property? Not every candidate was asked. I can speak to that legally. You have to be an owner within the community in order to run for the board. So it is absolutely appropriate to confirm that the candidate is in fact a record owner. And the only way to do that is to confirm it via the deed. So it is appropriate.
I actually had that situation at a building I managed last year, and I had to ask that gentleman to resign because he ran for the board because his parent owned the unit, but he was never on the deed. And I was not the manager at the time. And when I found out, I had to ask him to step down. And the rest of the board was actually kind of upset that I asked him to do that until I pointed out that he wasn't an owner. They were all under the impression he was the owner of the unit. So those conversations are very uncomfortable, but again, always good to engage your association legal counsel for direction and proper steps and how to address that board member properly to make sure that liability for your association is reduced.
Exactly. And I mean, there comes times where, a corporation may own it. Who's the LLC member? Who gets to act as the representative? So there's a lot of one-offs that we could spin with that question. But certainly, when in doubt, ask legal counsel. The next question I have is, and it's actually a very good question, something that comes up a lot, is can we require homeowners to identify themselves when calling into a virtual meeting? Board members join with video capabilities, but the homeowners just call in. Can we drop a caller if they refuse to identify themselves? I know I've told them, absolutely, if you don't identify who you are and what unit you're from, you're not able to participate, even though you're just listening in. Open board meetings are open for owners. They're not open to the public.
Well, that'd be a good point from the standpoint of if the person refuses to identify themselves, how do we know they even have a right to be in the meeting? Correct.
Then you politely tell them if you refuse to identify yourself, then you will not be allowed to participate in the call. And then, we're going to remove you from the call.
I ask for them to identify themselves, and I have not had anyone refuse. I think the one thing to do there is make sure that when you're communicating meeting information, make sure that information only goes to owners. So you don't have the opportunity for someone who's not an owner. I did want to ask the panel, I have my own question that ties into this. What do you do when a owner shares the login information for a board meeting with a prospective owner, and that prospective owner finds out something about the building because they sat in on a meeting and they weren't supposed to?
That's a Cathy question. I've never had that happen, but I think the liability goes back to the owner that allowed that person to join when they weren't a member.
Correct.
We never want to get involved or get tripped up in a third party fiasco as giving information to a buyer. And this is the same instance. It's up at all that.
So we have another question on, please speak on quorum. It says, email or Zoom communications between board members may violate the Open Meetings Act. So I think there's some confusion about the Open Meetings Act and its applicability. So it's kind of a complex question, but the Not-for-Profit Corporation Act actually allows electronic communications among the board. And the Zoom, the concept behind Zoom is that we're here. As long as owners can listen in and have listen-in capabilities, the board can properly act. So without going into that too much, and look, in this day and age, we're not allowed to meet in person. So we really have no choice, yet we're obligated to conduct 4 meetings a year. So we have to be able to think outside the box and do whatever is necessary while keeping safety and health in mind. Obviously, emailing, all decisions need to be made at an open board meeting. If it's via Zoom, that's great. That's how it needs to be accomplished. We have one more question. It says, what happens if a board member is in foreclosure? Is there limitations on their votes or position on the board? So just from a legal perspective, I can answer it very generally speaking. This would only be a case if the declaration says that you cannot vote or cannot serve on a board in the event that you are delinquent or not in good standing with your association. So there's no state law on it, and there's certainly no case. Well, there's no case law on it, no statutory provision. But if a declaration says it, then that's what you have to go with.
Well, and foreclosure.
Let me jump in here with a comment that we had a recent board meeting where during the discussion, one of the board members was asking all sorts of questions, was trying to require all sorts of additional information, and then at the end of the meeting, he resigned.
Oh, that happens.
Because he had sold his unit, so he resigned from the board. But it was, just one of those scenarios where why were you doing all of that, just to be disruptive in the meeting, or?
That was the answer, Len, to be disruptive.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Served his purpose. But it happens. It happens. And again, it's just about making sure that nobody feels ganged up on, making sure everyone says, I have an equal say. You let them speak their piece for a moment and then you move on.
Well, let me add too that even though somebody's in foreclosure, they still have ownership rights.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So absent the declaration saying otherwise.
Right.
Foreclosure doesn't necessarily mean that their assessment account is in arrears also. Those are 2 different situations. Yeah. It could be that they can't afford their mortgage payment, but they're making sure those assessments are paid every month. So you would have to look at more than just the foreclosure information in order to make a good decision on that.
Yeah, the general public, back when we had that downward turn, got wise to the fact that the association could evict you faster than the mortgage company could or wanted to.
The number one thing you better be told at a real estate closing: pay the assessments first, because we could evict you faster. So
yeah. I have to add though, as a board member, it is difficult to accept someone running for the board and making decisions, on behalf of the community who's not paying his assessments.
Understood. Yeah. All right, taking this into the next topic. So we've got cooperation, and a couple questions that have been posed to us include what happens when you transition between management companies, and how that's facilitated. So we've specifically received some questions, and we don't have any exact questions. So we're just going to speak on topic about this. We've got the legalities of transitioning books and records. I know Deb, myself, and both Cathy, we've dealt with issues when it comes to books and records not being transitioned or being inaccurate, incomplete, whatever the case may be. So if we can talk about that a little bit, I know Monica and Len, I'm hoping you guys have not experienced this as a board, but certainly from a management perspective, I know it happens.
Well, I can say that, yes, we experienced it when the management company we had at the time, they gave us 60-day notice according to the contract and said, by October 1st, we will no longer be your management company. So that was pretty traumatic because someone rang my doorbell and I got a registered letter in the mail. I'm like, what could this be? So then we had to very quickly look at, potential management companies that we thought would be a good fit for us and, make a decision and go. So it did work well for us. I'm happy to say that's when we moved to PSI. So, and in fact, it's even better than the previous management company. So sometimes things happen for the best.
Absolutely.
Well, and for Deb and I call it swapping spits in the industry. We all, management of properties is cyclical, and it depends who's on the board and, what's your productivity, whatever the case may be. But we get properties back too. So, you know what? You give to your competitor everything that you would expect to have, which my firm and Deb firm does, but there are some others that don't. And it leaves actually the association in a bad place. We had one recently where they just stopped recording the financials as of the 25th of the month. Well, then we had to try to create a week's worth rather than ending it professionally through the end of the month. So it's going to cost you money in the long run too, but we know what each other needs to get going and to wrap up things, to close accounts, to transfer paper records and electronic records. So if the board ever finds themselves in that position, when you get a professional management company, you don't have to worry about that. We take care of it.
At the end of the day, we're all professionals here. You switch doctors, you switch the guy that works on your car, you switch lots of things all the time in your personal life, and changing management companies is really no different. But we do have to remember that we are the professionals in the room, and we have to provide the information that is requested of us in a timely manner, because having sour grapes and dragging your feet or not handling anything in a proactive manner when you get that termination letter, that just makes you look worse. And the opportunity to possibly repartner with that community down the line kind of gets eliminated when you have behaved poorly when you get that term letter. So it's always to remember, you're right, Cathy, things are cyclical and they come back. So every interaction you have should be handled with the utmost professionalism and courtesy to the other company.
Correct.
Yeah, I think from the industry perspective, we want seamless transition. That's what we all encourage. That's what we all want to see. And for the most part, that is what happens. Look, is there bumps in the road? Absolutely. There's going to be bumps in the road. It happens. You just have to power through them.
I think more often than not, the bumps in the road come about when you're trying to come up with paper records being transferred. You're looking for a guarantee or a warranty on some significant capital project that was done 5 years ago. And there's been a management change in between, and you're rummaging through some boxes of misfiled papers and the like, assuming that you can even find it. That's an issue that I'm not sure how you can address it, but that certainly is an issue.
You do your best to try to recreate what you have. And that's the best that I can relay to somebody. I mean, look, if it's something that absolutely should have been there, should have been transitioned, it was evident that it was withheld, then there's some legalities that go with that. But for the most part, the one management company is not looking to hold back an entire box on purpose to avoid the board from being able to do their work. Does it happen?
I've also been put in the position too where the next agent wants me to train them on their property.
Yeah.
And that's not my job. My job is to turn over records and you create your own. I'm not going to get you. So my end smooth means something than somebody else's. We recently
the expectation.
Well, you sent this Excel spreadsheet. Could you add a column and now insert this? We're like, really? We gave you add the column and put it in there.
Correct. All right. So I have two questions. I don't know that necessarily they go with exactly what we're talking about, but I do want to make sure that we address them. We've got a question about how is non-payment of assessments known before an election? And the answer to that is it's not. That type of information is not for owners to receive. That is privileged and confidential information that the board is not to discuss in open forum. It's intended for executive session. So you're not going to know the answer to that. I think the question that came before that was about foreclosures. Foreclosures are public record. So in that instance, if you've got an owner who's not in good standing with their mortgage company, that's known to everybody. It's a matter of, you can go on any court records and see it. So it's different than what we were talking about. The second question says, how do you handle board members who don't check email for days and don't respond to requests from the president or manager? This causes delays in important decisions and puts, bear with me because I'm scrolling down.
The association at risk.
It puts the association at risk. Anyone want to touch on that?
That one happens often, believe it or not.
Yep.
And my son-in-law happens to be on his board. You're like, and the next manager, it's like, Kevin, you know better. Get on there and get the communication going. I think rules, or, if you're updating your decks and bylaws, put some guidelines in there for participation of board members. It's so much harder on all of us when we don't get a collective response.
I talk about setting the expectation, right? That's what that goes to, is setting the tone. You set the tone. You have a new board, whether they've been a board member for 5 years or they're a brand new board member. You set the tone. You talk about, this is how we need to run effectively. We communicate via email. We communicate by phone. We need you to be responsive so that we're ready when we're at a board meeting to take a vote. Everyone's on the same page and we're ready to move, right? We don't need 5-hour board meetings. 1-hour board meetings. That's what we always, strive for.
I recently had to reach out to a board member and ask him to resign because he never participates. Mm-hmm. Only when money's involved will he chime in. So, and there's other people that want to step up and fill that spot. And right now with the COVID and annual elections being what they are, we're all kind of just having to wade our way through it.
All right, so I think that's a good segue into transitioning between boards. So we've talked about transitioning between management companies, but what happens about between boards, right? We've got new board members coming in every year, whether, we've got the staggered terms, 3 coming in, 2 coming in, whatever the case may be. Specifically, I know some of the questions that have come in are not necessarily about those boards that are represented by management companies. Technically, in that case, we've got management reports. Management gives them a report. It makes it a little clearer for them to have a better picture of what they're seeing from a month-to-month basis. But when we have self-managed boards, that's where the issue is.
Oh, Cathy froze. Cathy, are you back? No.
Can you see me?
Now you're back.
Now you can? All right. So specifically, we're talking about self-managed boards and the issues that they might have and the fiduciary obligations that they owe to the rest of the community to make sure that they're transitioning correctly. So does anyone want to pipe up about transitioning between boards and any issues that they've seen and how you can handle it?
Well, I certainly can't.
Go ahead,
Cathy. No, you go ahead, Cathy.
No, you're on a board. It's more important to come from.
Well, I was going to say I can't speak to a board that's self-managed because we're only dealing with property managers. But we have like as I said before, 9 members of the board, and we have staggered elections. So 1 year you have 4 members, 1 year you have 5. You serve 2-year terms. And we provide so much information and to not only to the board members, but also to the unit owners, or give them access to information, whether they seek to find it or not, that's up to them. But almost everybody, certainly knows what's going on in the building, whether they're, haven't been on the board or whether they're on the board on a regular basis, or whether they were on the board in the past and are coming back. And I think that's the point you were making was it's really important to have as much information available to a new board member, so that they understand, I didn't know anything about this $1.5 million capital project that you were embarking on. And that's the kind of a thing I think you have to really be most cognizant about is as much information as possible.
I would encourage, and this happened or we implemented it after I got on the CIA board, I'm not sure which, but there was an orientation amongst board members for the new members in a non-formal setting where they could ask questions and find out what the expectations are, what their role would be, what's coming up, rather than, here's the box of records from everything that's happened in the past. That might be a good tip for all boards to do with new members coming on.
Yeah, I've also seen transition meetings. I've had several associations do the transition meeting where we start from, the last meeting of the month before the annual election. We start to make sure that all of our ducks are in a row, right? That there's nothing outstanding. We've got a list of things that are ongoing. The minutes are reflective of it so that old business and new business is clean, making sure that nothing's been left out. Because obviously we don't know who the new board is yet because the election hasn't happened, but the best we can do is call it a transition meeting and hope that it all works smoothly once the new board comes in to transition them in. So. Someone questioned, the question came in, I thought you cannot make decisions by email. That's correct. Decisions are not being made by email. Decisions are always going to be made. A vote is going to be taken at an open board meeting. What I mentioned earlier was, let's say, for instance, that there is a pending landscaping contract. The expectation is that board members are being given those contracts behind the scenes, reviewing them so that when you come to the board meeting as part of a board packet, for instance, you're looking at it, getting ready to make a decision right there at the meeting. You're not necessarily voting by email, but sometimes there may be a question posed so that when you're at the board meeting, that question can be addressed. And Deb, Cathy, can you guys speak to that a little bit?
If we didn't have that, these meetings would be 4 and 5 hours long.
Yes, yes.
Agreed.
Because you have to be able to give them the opportunity to look at everything and you're right, formulate their question, ask management questions so that the answers are brought to the meeting so that you're not constantly tabling important decisions.
Yeah. But so let me give you an example, though, of a decision that has to be made outside of a board meeting. So we generally do a newsletter once a quarter. So, somebody drafts it and then it gets sent to the board for additional comments and feedback. And so finally, we're all happy with the newsletter, right? So then, that's a decision we can make and then send it out. You can't do everything at a board meeting. But
and that type of decision is not illegal. That's not a legal action to be taken by the board. Right. That's something, and more than likely your newsletter is including information that's already in the approved minutes from the last meeting. So you're simply relaying to the ownership that information from the last approved board meeting.
Yes, correct. That's right.
In our case, when we meet an executive session, or not executive session, but the executive committee, if we'll do something or approve something in the executive committee, that is always then through board meeting, so that we make sure that the entire board is on board and the entire board votes on it.
Correct. Ratification.
Yeah. Right. So it's also important, and when you're the managing agent, you deliver that board packet in enough time that the board has ample opportunity to review it. Sending the board packet to that group 2 hours or even just one day before that meeting really does not do you or the board any favors in terms of being able to conduct business in a timely and informative manner. You have to give everybody an opportunity to review everything, all the proposals, all the dialogue, everything.
And on the flip side, we ask the same courtesy of the board members who are getting that packet 5-6 days ahead to not wait till the meeting to ask you questions. We used to be able to say before all this electronics, well, I didn't bring the file cabinet with me, so I can't answer that. But to see somebody open up for the first time that management report at the meeting is so disheartening when we put so much effort into getting it out in advance.
Yep.
And those management packets are not always easy to put together. You have some boards that have a lot of business consistently every month. So there's a lot of information that you're keeping track of and trying to convey. So I agree wholeheartly. Luckily, my boards are very good about reading their board packets before a meeting and ask questions ahead of time. But that a lot of the time too has to do with you as the manager training your board. They have to see that you need them to do certain things in order to do your job, and calling you out in a board meeting with a question that you could have asked a week ago, and now the manager can't get you an answer because it's 8:00 at night and no one is open. It's a part of training your board too, to know they have to read that packet and get back to you in a timely fashion.
Yeah. And again, the end game is you're not making decisions by email. You're simply inquiring so that you can make the appropriate action at a board meeting. All right. I think that takes us into our next topic, which is collaboration. And this definitely takes us into some controversial areas regarding vendors and the types of contracts that need to be solicited for a board. And specifically, we've received questions about the request for proposal process and whether this should be done, shouldn't be done, and how it's handled from an industry perspective. Cathy, can you speak a little bit about the teamwork that comes in between the board and the manager?
Absolutely. And RFPs, requests for proposals, are absolutely vital, especially on larger projects or landscape contracts, snow contracts. The RFP sets the specifications. So we can assume that you want the grass cut at 2 inches, but perhaps you want it cut at 1 and you want the clippings removed. That's what your collaboration with your board is, to make sure that that's their intent. That's what they want to pay for. We try to keep their dreams of having golf course grass at bay because they won't like the price tag, but it is absolutely vital to have the specifications drafted. This isn't our first rodeo, so it's very easy for us to go in and pull specs similar to a project that you're having. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to re-roofing or structural things, hire an engineer. Let them write the specifications. Let them be the professional that's going to take that project from start to finish.
Agreed. Wholeheartedly there.
We have to know a lot about a lot of things, but engineers, we are not.
Sure. All right. Go ahead, Monica.
Yeah, that's
Monica,
true.
go ahead. Do you have a question?
And especially with, things like roofing, we're not roofers. No one on the board is. So you do want to have an engineer, or at least someone who's a consultant and has experience in that area to help identify all of the various specs. And then you have to make sure that once you get the proposals and the final contract, that those requirements are in there in the contract.
I'm just going to add a little side note because it's weather related to our ice damming right now. And re-roofing is not simply taking off shingles and putting them back down. Re-roofing is soffits and fascia and air ventilation and a whole lot of things where it's not a simple project and should always go to an engineer firm to select bid. Because if you ask 5 different roofers how to re-roof, they'll all have different opinions.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. And it's vital. And that's part of the ice damming that we experience when we have 40 inches of snow.
That kind of transitions us into, so we have a question and it says, can the entire board have access to board attorney opinions? Our manager will just paraphrase such as, he said we did it right. So let's say we have a situation where there's an inquiry about a specific contract. Can we do this? And it goes to the attorney and the attorney gives an opinion. That opinion should be relayed to the entire board. It's not privileged just for the manager's eyes. It's intended for the board's eyes only. And I will put that in a lot of the top of my letters, for the board's eyes only. I want to make clear the communication goes to everybody on the board. Equal, everyone's got an equal say, equal voting. It's not just to the board president. It's not the intent behind the direction of an opinion. An opinion is intended to guide the board generally. Got an inquiry about, should a board require members to sign an NDA when serving on a committee commission? I do not have boards who sign non-disclosure agreements. That's not something that is signed or executed. You have a fiduciary obligation. The obligation is to make sure that you're keeping information confidential. If you're not, you can be sued, plain and simple. And it happens. It happens all the time. So making sure that you keep your mouth shut is imperative. And there's really no other way to say that. And I can't tell you guys how many letters I've had to send that says exactly that. You cannot be divulging information that is given to you at a board meeting.
An effective tool to give any candidate running for the board is a board oath.
Yes.
This is what is expected. Can you abide by this? It's not legally binding, but at least it puts it out there that that's the expectation if you're going to step into that role.
So one of my boards that do have several commissions, they did all have to sign an oath of confidentiality because they were working on multi-million-dollar financial review for loans and special assessments and a very large facade project. And all those commission members signed an oath. So one owner that didn't sign it, the board said, then you can't be on the commission. It was a requirement. So again, something to check with your attorneys about, because each, like the roofers with 5 different opinions, 5 different attorneys will give you 5 different opinions too. So just make sure you're checking.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not a matter of the law doesn't require it. Should you do it? It's up to you. It's really a gray area. So it's just, and again, you'll get 5 different opinions. So it doesn't really matter.
Right.
All right. So taking us into the next subtopic, we've got what to do with a contract before it's signed. Something near and dear to my heart, because I am forever being asked to look at something after the fact. And my first thought is, you should have given this to me before you signed it, because now you're stuck with whatever you signed. And I'm bound by the 4 corners of the contract. So the point that we would like to make and expand on the topic is making sure that you're negotiating terms within the contract before it's signed. And Len and Monica, if you guys can speak to that at the board level, before it comes to the manager or even to legal counsel.
Well, since we've used PSI as our management company, I can tell you that Sarah is always saying, okay, let me send that to the attorney for review. And, which is the right answer. Yeah.
I think we look at it from the standpoint of, and again, has to do with with who the board members are. But we'll look at it from the standpoint of what the size of the contract is, what the complexity of the contract is. I'm not going to necessarily be worried about a $10,000 contract to do a bit of landscaping 4 times a year, relative to our building. If I'm going to spend $50,000 to replace a piece of capital equipment, then the not only the proposals but the contract before it's signed, that'll get reviewed by the attorney.
Let me pose the question this way. So yes, as attorneys, we receive these contracts. We're being asked to review them. The problem that we encounter from the legal perspective is that we are presuming that the key points have been reviewed by the board. So I think that's what the key to the questions that are being posed is, that the onus is on the board. They know their community. They know what they're looking for. You can't expect to send me a contract and say, here's our landscaping contract. Is it all good? Well, it may or may not be good. I don't know. If I'm mowing common area that you don't have, then it's a problem. I mean, I might not know that. Right? Or, we're salting sidewalks that are not our responsibility to salt. I need the input. So it's important that you don't just expect that, your attorney is going to be the end game and catch it all. It's a group project. It's about collaborating, and making sure that before it comes to me, that the other side of it has already done their part.
Yeah. What we would look at the attorney review would be much more the legal aspects of the contract, as opposed to early termination, something of that nature. Rather than saying, well, is this a good price? No, or.
Well, and that's my job is I point out and I say, I have not looked at this contract relative to the price terms or to the, if it's a snow plowing contract, do you understand that it says 2 inches? I mean, it says 2 inches. You've seen it says 2 inches. I shouldn't have to point that out to you. You should understand those terms that my job is to look early termination, default, making sure that you're covered insurance wise, indemnification, that those types of provisions.
Yes, exactly.
And both parties are protected equally because
Correct.
If you sign a vendor contract, it's all swayed their way.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. So you're going to get an addendum.
Make sure you send elevator contracts and laundry contracts all the time.
Oh, laundry room contracts. Again, one of those things, you bring it to me. I'm like, you should have brought this to me 3 years ago because it automatically renewed for another 10 years. So there's only so much we can do about it. So again, key point is make sure you know what you're looking at before you sign it and make sure you know your renewal provisions.
Well, Deb knows me well enough to know at this point in time to know that I've never looked at a document that I didn't edit somewhere along the way.
And with a very heavy red pen.
red writing all over it.
But again, there's another example of collaboration between your property manager and your board. One of 3470 was the first building I managed as a portfolio manager. They were the first board I was introduced to, the first board meeting I ever ran. So they're like my first true love in property management. The atmosphere. Yeah, the atmosphere with them is very much collaboration. They have, as we said, they all bring something unique and special and important to the table. And they don't view me as a person that is just going to take orders from them, although I do. They like to work collaboratively. We all have an opinion. We all have a thought, and working together is what makes working with the board like that so enjoyable and not really work.
I think that's a good segue into our next topic of conflict resolution. And a lot of what comes with this is, it takes us full circle back to why can't we all just get along, right? Can't we all, we're just going to have to agree to disagree. And I use that a lot. It's part of our world. Everyone has an equal say, but at the end of the day, we take a vote. That vote, if you got 3 in favor and 2 against, 3 carries, motion passes. But again, there are problems with conflict, and how we handle that is important. So specifically, we have a question about how do you handle a dispute between management and the board when it pertains to financial statements? Kath, you want to talk a little bit about it?
In my experience, I have found, and Monica has lived this with me, with your treasurer, when they're disputing with management about the financials, you typically find it's because they don't know how to read them. Mm-hmm. And financials and they're corporate and they're GAAP compliant, and they're very daunting. They're very intimidating. So when I have that conflict, or one of my managers does, I'll take over the reins and say, let me train them. Let me have a review with them, and I will deconstruct them and make them less scary and tell you what you need to be looking at. Some of the other conflicts are, let us review every single invoice before it gets paid, mm-hmm. which is slowing up processes and procedures. Mm-hmm. Because you've already signed the contract that says you're going to pay $1,000 for landscaping. Why do I have to run that by you?
Exactly.
So you can have some cooperation, the ups and extras, maybe have an agreement that you'll wing that by them to make sure it's adequate and what they wanted. But typically it goes back to the scariness of how to read the financial itself.
It's a good point. It's all about training. It is. And understanding what they're looking at. And again, a lot of it is miscommunication. Mm-hmm. And it can give rise to, bitter feelings and definitely, an ensuing, and there's nothing worse than an argument at a board meeting when you're there and you've got owners there and it just looks like there's strife. You don't want that.
But then again, if what we're saying isn't resonating with them, then you absolutely say, you need to go to your CPA then. Mm-hmm. Don't trust me. Mm-hmm. Go. They have the license
industry
for that.
Professionals for you. Absolutely.
Correct. well, we don't want to pay them. Well, then I can't help you.
Yeah, and it's true. It's true.
Mhm.
Well, the one thing you can do is when you're putting together a board, if you have that possibility, is to try to focus, look at the backgrounds of people and say, well, let's not elect this person treasurer who doesn't know a debit from a credit. If there is somebody on the board who has the capacity or has some financial training somewhere along the way, try to push that person into the treasurer's job rather than, like I said, somebody who doesn't have any kind of a background in that at all.
And more than likely, they're on the board for that exact reason, is because they want to make sure that things are being done in accordance with how their industry and their profession. If you're a numbers person, you're a numbers person. You can look at it and see it. Whereas, and your job at that point is to guide the other people who are not numbers people, make sure that they understand it.
But let me, to the homeowner members that are on this seminar, it is the fiduciary duty of every board member to understand those financials, not just the treasurer.
Yeah. Correct. All right. So we've got one other question about contested elections and how to handle board members who can't get along. And I'm sure we could have an entire hour-long conversation about this. I know that I deal with this all the time. But we've got the clarification to be made is about the distinction between running for the board and not for officer positions. And I know that this comes up a lot, and making sure that we address this for the community. So some thoughts on how that's handled at the elections?
Contested elections should always have vote tabulation done by an outside accounting firm without question. Taking on that responsibility and that liability as the manager or even a representative of the management firm from their accounting department is just not a good idea. You should always engage a third party to do that vote tabulation. If it's that contested of an election, there's obviously very strong feelings one way or another, and you want to make sure there's no opportunity for someone to come back and say that the managing agent didn't handle that election properly.
Well, and one of the keys too is to knowledge is power. So if you put it out there with all of your election material, and this is how it's going to go, and you're running for a seat, and then the board elects their own officers, it's known then. But back to the day when we used to have in-person elections, on a contested election, you try to conduct it as fairly as you can by asking for members from the audience to tabulate the votes that aren't candidates that are running. Have a neutral party. Management typically calls out the votes. We have nothing to gain or lose by it. We all want to get along. So just tips and tricks like that.
It's impartiality. You find some you election proctors. You have people that are going to sit with you, that are going to help tabulate, certify the tabulation. I make them sign off on it, circle the numbers. If it's 13 votes for this person, they circle a little 13 and they count them themselves. But it seems to work. And I have been involved in litigation regarding an election, and all I can tell you is that by the time you litigate a contested election, you're at the next election. So I don't know. People they feel so personal about it. But the end game is you're not going to get a result in court before the next election happens anyway. So that's the reality behind it.
Another tip and trick, because I know this happens often in associations where you have one candidate that scours the neighborhood, knocking on doors and gathers all the proxies.
Yep. Right.
And they're all, done deal. Make sure your election rules are such, for instances like that. I've had an association where they've limited the amount of proxies that can be gained or be given. I'm hoping to get rid of proxies, but we don't have them for presidential elections. I'm not sure why associations have them.
Okay.
But anyway.
So what do you think about voting by mail?
It's more work on management.
Yeah.
Truly, because you have to do the call for candidates. We get it back in, we massage that mailing, then we get the ballots that typically have a postage stamped envelope on it back. sealed and we're unsealing, it is cleaner when you have a contentious election. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it knocks out the need for the proxy because the homeowner mails in their own ballot.
Right. Yeah. In our association, we've never had until last year, till last June. A lot of times, there would be no one even else running. Yeah, but last summer, that was a different situation. There was a lot of interest in the election. Everybody was home. You know how it is. They pay attention to all kinds of things that they never paid attention to.
Yep, we know that. Right?
Also, yeah. Yeah. We had, a lot of proxies, and, one board member was very active in collecting them. But we've done that for years. So we felt like we weren't doing anything differently, but, some homeowners were not happy. So, it would be nice to do something different this year so that they feel that it's more fair.
Right. The problem we're running into, and I don't mean to just jump into elections, is with it's a big question for all of us right now with annual elections and no in-person meetings. Mm-hmm. And where legal counsel stands on, because nobody, the legislators who developed the Condo Act and the state statutes had no idea COVID was coming.
Yeah.
But yet we're to follow those mandates, but yet we can't in order to keep everybody safe. So in my view, I've seen legal throughout the whole COVID period start getting lenient and more lenient. For instance, one of the requirements for, I believe, condos is that you have to have a ballot box that somebody can drop off a ballot in person. Are we gonna let that? They have to defend the association, so it's really up to legal counsel and their comfort level if they're going to stand before a judge and say, "Well, we didn't have that one spot."
It's such gray area, and with what we're dealing with, the notion of fairness is really what it comes down to, and trying to make sure that it's a fair election. And if the best you can do is put out a ballot box and conduct it by Zoom, or you do mail-in voting, however you do it, again, it's all about fairness. And every attorney's going to we all have different opinions on how to handle things. I will tell you, the only thing that we can all agree on is that we have to think outside the box, because the law tells us to do it one way, and COVID has taken us a completely different route. So thinking outside the box and how that thinking is done varies by attorney. But in the end, the notion is to make sure that owners feel that they have the power to vote. And in the end, that they have the ability to cast that vote. And how it's accomplished, that's up to each individual board and their attorney and manager and how to effectuate that. We have a bunch of questions. So unless the panel would like to talk a little bit more about anything in our conflict resolution chats that we... All right, so I'm going to try to go through some of these, and I apologize. Some of these we may have addressed, so if we have, we'll just kind of touch on them a little bit. So we have a question posed is, any suggestions on how to deal with board member owners who want to repair association assets to save money as opposed to hiring a service provider? And I'm hoping that the answer to this, or the question behind this is, for instance, are we talking maintenance of...
Painting the fence.
Painting the fence. I was going to say like the sign, the monument signs, planting flowers. I'm going to assume that that's the scope of this question. Really, the end decision is the board's decision. So if the board decides that we're going to hire a service provider and the board votes on it, and the majority of the board says we're going to hire this vendor versus having somebody else do it, then that's the way we do it. Kath, what you saying?
Check your insurance policy. Sometimes volunteers are not
absolutely volunteers
covered.
Are not. Yep. But ultimately, the board is the one that's going to make the decision, and I think that's what the gist of this question is how do we feel about it? The legalities of it is the board is the one making the decision. So an owner could gripe about it all they want, but if the board is acting within their fiduciary duties and making decisions that are in accordance with their governing documents, for instance, in compliance with their insurance policy, then the decision's been made. Somebody inquired about whether or not they should talk to their manager about the oath. Certainly, if you'd like to discuss, the possibility of a board oath, talk to your property manager, talk to legal counsel. They may be able to guide you along the path. We've got questions about what are the rules for not-for-profits regarding emails and discussions between board members. So I was looking at these questions as we were chatting earlier, and the only thing that I can attribute to this is I'm going to treat it as executive session. And I think that executive session is not really understood by a lot of owners who don't understand the concept behind it. So executive sessions can be called without notice. I don't need to give owners notice that I'm conducting an executive session. So long as the executive session is being conducted for the purposes that the law allows us to hold an executive session for, it's not open to owners. It's an executive session for that purpose. There's no voting going on, no actions being taken, but they are required to keep meeting minutes of it. And those meeting minutes are legit that we talked about, one of these 6 items that are prescribed in the statute. And then action is taken at the board meeting for anything that's discussed. For instance, if we're discussing a landscaping contract, that's one of the things that we can discuss in executive session. You're not voting on it in executive session. You're discussing it. Now, certainly, I can't address the email part of it because a lot of what's happening is there is email communication simply because of COVID. So again, we have to, and without saying, everyone's like, oh, palm, like that's what everyone's thinking. It's not about that. Again, the legality of it is the board's not taking action. As long as action is not being taken by email and it's being done at a board meeting, we'll call it executive session. Go ahead, Kath.
Cathy, what is your stance on, as far as minutes go, when you have violations or collections and putting somebody's name in the minutes or an address, or how do you identify that?
I call it a code. I tell the board to create a code. Usually management has their own coding system that they can keep behind the scenes. So if it's, Unit 101 is the one that's being, imposed a fine for whatever the case is. They'll call it case number 3002, whatever you call it, just so long as the board knows what case 3002 applies to. That's all that needs to be said. You don't want owners knowing, Unit 101's owner was just fined $100 because he didn't take his garbage out. You're not supposed to disclose that information. So I suggest
to go along with public shaming or something like that.
Yeah, you might as well flog them, right? It's
in some cases.
So rather than deal with the wrath of that, yeah. All right. Going through some more of these questions because I don't want to make anyone think that we're not addressing them. If a board signed a contract for a time period longer than the declaration allows for, are they bound by this? This occurred under the watch of our prior managing agent. I can tell you that we have recently handled 2 of these. So, 1, the board should know that if your declaration says that you are only authorized to sign a contract that lasts no more than, for instance, a management agreement that does not last more than 2 years in duration, then that's what you're bound by. If the board signed a management contract that is 3 years in duration and it's contradictory to what your declaration says, that contract is void. And we've had to take that stance, and it sucks. It sucks to have to send a letter to the management company that says, I am sorry, but the board did not have the authority to enter into a 3-year contract with you. So it's imperative that both on the board understands their declaration, that management is familiar with the provisions, and then ultimately comes back to legal, that legal's looking at it and making sure that it's compliant.
So you're saying we could get out of an elevator contract if the decks say they can only approve a 2-year contract?
If it says that for services,
ThyssenKrupp is going to let us out.
If it says, well, look, the end game is going to be you may end up in litigation over it. But if it's a 10-year contract and you're in year 4 and you don't want to be in 6 through 10, right? Or, whatever it is. Hey, I'm going to try for you. Look, nobody wants litigation. I'm not here to make money off of anybody, but the reality is that there are ways that, you can certainly, it's semantics. I don't like to play it, but if it comes to that, declaration speaks. All right. Another question we've got is, sorry, I'm scrolling through a tiny box on here. The lady who asked the question, oh, never mind. It's a comment, not a question. What do you do when a board member shares private information in a meeting, such as breaking a rule or responds to a question when you bring up work not being done? You guys want to speak to that?
Read that again.
What do you do when a board member shares private information in a meeting, such as breaking a rule, talking about a violation that an owner may have been charged with, or respond to a question when you bring up work not being done? For instance, there's some sort of a dispute with a contractor. And I think they're talking about specifically when you do it in a meeting. I mean, from my perspective, you have to shut that down immediately.
Exactly.
Because
yes.
you're not supposed to be talking about it, as polite as you can, so that it doesn't ensue into a huge argument. But it's privileged and confidential. That's the type of information you're not supposed to divulge at an open meeting.
It's happened in board meetings, in our board meetings occasionally, where somebody will raise a question about a staff member or raise a question about another unit owner, and we shut that down as quickly as we possibly can and say that's something that should only be discussed in executive session.
Absolutely. All right. One of the questions says, how do you know when there is actually a quorum to vote? And I'm assuming that they're asking about a quorum to vote in a Zoom meeting. In a Zoom meeting, well, quorum generally is governed by your declaration.
Yeah.
So we'll go with that answer being the quickest answer. But I'm assuming if we're talking about quorum here, like we're on Zoom, and if, there's 5 board members, depending on what the declaration calls for, let's say it's majority. If 3 are on, we have a quorum. Just to give an example of that. So, but I will say this, if you got one board member that falls off the Zoom call and you no longer have a quorum, that poses an issue. So it's imperative that you make the time to be, if you're dedicating an hour to a board meeting, you're dedicating an hour to a board meeting, because establishing quorum is important. Once you lose that quorum, you need to call your meeting. You're done. So you shouldn't be transacting business without a quorum. Deb, Cathy, I'm sure you guys have encountered this, right? I mean, it's
absolutely. More often we deal with not able to make or obtain quorum.
Yes, yes.
We're chasing to get those 4 meetings in per year sometimes, and it's
absolutely
like pulling teeth. And especially in Zoom, because Zoom makes it so easy.
Yep. We have another question that says, how do you know there really are proxies?
I think that ties into the question you just asked. How do you know there's really quorum, meaning how do you know there really are proxies?
Well, that's part of the tabulation. So the way a proxy works is you exchange a proxy for a ballot. So arguably speaking, when we're doing mail-in, that doesn't always work that way, right? But usually the proxy will designate how the vote is to be done in a mail-in. Correct, Cathy, Deb? That's how your proxies have been sent out?
Mm-hmm. Started calling proxy ballots.
Proxy ballots, whatever we call them. But don't forget, from a perspective of records, those are kept for a year. They're maintained for a year. So if there's ever any doubt, not that I like to encourage people to review records, but it's your right. It's your right to do it. If you'd like to go and review the proxies and ballots, it's your right to do so. One more question we've got. Should the envelope and ballot have a resident's name and address on the outside of the envelope opposed to percentage of ownership? I'm not as concerned about percentage of ownership being on it when they turn it in, because traditionally management, correct? We've got a chart, we've got a spreadsheet, we're tabulating the percentage of ownership aspect.
I think that might go, or they're speaking probably to secret balloting.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
which
maybe.
Only can be done typically if it's in your election rules or in your
if it provides for it in your declaration. Yeah.
If there's no secret balloting in either one of those places, then the owner's name must be on the ballot.
It has to be on there. Otherwise, you can't designate. You don't know whose it is, and then it's invalidated and it's put off to the side. So I'm assuming that that's not going to secret balloting. I'm assuming that maybe it is. I don't know. All right, one more question. We got a couple more questions. Why do some candidates for the board have to provide a deed and not others?
All candidates should be able to verify their legal ownership in the building, not just a select few.
Yeah.
But I can say from my chair, it's typically not an issue unless somebody raises, that's really not the owner, that's his girlfriend.
Correct.
Right. Exactly.
Then we're going, let's run a track search, which is very minimal expense through the attorney to make sure that the candidates are all on the deed.
Let me just point out that this is all public record. Anybody can check the record ownership of anyone's unit. Doesn't matter. You don't need to be a lawyer to look it up. I technically don't need to do a track search. Track search is the easiest way because then I'm having somebody else certify it.
That's why we go to you.
Absolutely, but because I certify it. But I'm saying I've been at annual meetings where we have literally had the recorder's website open and have been verifying ownership. I mean, it happens. I have behind the scenes access, so for me it's a little different. But there's nothing wrong with the recorder's website.
But the election material that goes out does state anybody that is going to represent candidacy must be
a legal owner
on the deed.
Yep.
So if there's ever a question within a community, it should be raised before the election, either to management or to the board, that there's a concern that perhaps somebody's not
correct
on deed.
We have it appears to be one last question. So we've got, what resources are available for residents who believe their HOA is not following the Illinois Condominium Property Act? Legal action is expensive. So I will say that CAI has a ton of resources available online. There's a lot of webinars. There's a lot of articles. There's nothing wrong with Googling, but I will tell you CAI is a great resource for that type of information. From the legal perspective, we write articles for CAI. So we are there to help. We are there to educate. And when in doubt, you could always pose a question. CAI does take inquiries and they will, and I have seen it, they will farm it out to try to find you an answer. There's tons of forums out there. Not that I like people, being WebMD, but it's out there, right? I mean, there's lots of information available on the web. And if it seems suspicious, then, you can run it by legal counsel and see if.
I think one of the things that everybody got a taste of and it never came to fruition was the ombudsman.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which would have been a path that a homeowner could have taken without legal expense.
Correct.
To file a complaint or on knowing if the board was conducting itself properly. Unfortunately, we live in the state of Illinois and they pass all these things and can't fund them.
Yeah,
so HOA is kind of a broad term too. So who is not following the Condominium Act? Is it your board not following it? Is your manager not following it?
Yeah.
So there are two different places to go for rectifying both of those or getting questions to both of those two parties that are involved in your property.
Yeah. And in our case, we don't follow the Condo Act. We follow SECA. So because we're homeowner association.
So property managers are licensed through the state. And so it is important that if you are a homeowner that you're feeling that your manager is doing something illegal, I mean, your first step should be to be able to bring it to your board and then let the board move forward with any particular investigation or questioning about that.
We have one question that says, is 1% ownership on a deed allowed for rental at a no rental property? I can tell you that that's a sneaky way to do it, but ownership is ownership. If I have 5% ownership versus 95% ownership, you're joint tenants. You're an owner. Whether it's 5%, 1%, you're an owner. And on paper, it's a way to get around a rental, and people do it all the time.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know. I've had it happen.
If people would just use their powers for good 1%. Instead of evil.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. It's the way around, but it does happen and it does work. All right. Are there any other questions from those viewers that have not been addressed? Now is your time. Put them in the chat. Other than that, any closing thoughts from anybody? Anything you can share, a tidbit?
Well, one thing I'll say is I think I'm going to look into this board oath, okay? Because we have board members who are well-intentioned, but, they've served a number of years. Some of them have never read the declaration or anything in our governing documents and don't really know what they say. So, then they say, well, can we do this and this and this?
Monica, Sarah's listening. She's making a note. She'll get to the board oath.
Oh, that's wonderful. And then we also have a board member who he shares his email with his wife. Okay.
That's a common occurrence.
Yeah.
We have recommended often, it's not a good idea. It doesn't cost anything to open another email. And sometimes she's chimed in and written to the board.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I get it. It happens.
Yeah.
Deb is chuckling over there because we've had that same problem on an ongoing basis.
Oh, okay.
And it's an issue. It's not so much in email. It's the inability to keep board discussions within the board. You go home and you talk to your wife or your husband or your significant other, whatever it might be, and that's okay as long as something doesn't come back out of that. So then, that person then talks to another unit owner and pretty soon there's all sorts of information flying around that should never have been outside a board meeting, but it is. We've addressed that in some cases quite hard.
Severely.
With warnings, fines, but the whole issue of what goes on in a board meeting stays in the board meeting. What goes on in an executive session stays in an executive session, and things that are discussed that are supposed to be in confidence are not supposed to be spread around the rest of the association.
I think for me, what comes out of this is, look, serving on a board is a thankless job. A lot of people don't really understand what they're getting themselves into when they, if they're appointed to fill a vacancy or they're actually run for the board. But a part of that comes into, you also need to educate yourself. You can't, like to Monica's point, read the declaration, understand what your role is. There's resources out there, but
you can decal course through CAI.
Absolutely. I mean, there's again, it's shameless plug for CAI, but it's out there. I mean, it is, and
it is,
and there's a number of industry professionals that are ready, willing, and able to guide you along the path. So,
I have a quick funny since we have a lull here. This just happened to me. On a property, and I still manage properties, so I know what my managers are going through. But we had 3 new appointed board members come on. Something went out about insurance and the banning of charcoal grills. We've all dealt with that. Mm-hmm. And I get this homeowner that's asking all these questions, and it only went out as a resolution for the board to consider to bring it to the meeting to ban the grills. Well, this gentleman, hot and heavy, came on email saying, "What do you mean we can't have grills?" I turned to the board. I'm like, "All right, who told this guy?" The names together on the emails. It was one of the new board member's husband.
Oh,
so I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah.
But so that's where Pillow Talk.
Lesson learned.
Full swing, and she's like, "I'm sorry." I'm like, "It's okay." Well,
again, Pillow Talk is fine as long as the pillow stays where the pillow is and it isn't moved into the elevator vestibule or the fitness center or the laundry room. Like, it needs to just stay there.
Yeah.
When you're on a board and there's a lot of things going on, your spouse can be a great source of comfort or idea that maybe the board might not have thought of. And that's great as long as that spouse doesn't, share what they've learned.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, this particular gentleman thinks he's going to change the insurance industry to allow charcoal drilling again.
Well,
because he found some facts on the internet that support the fact that they should have charcoal.
Great. Get your petition, and bring it to the board, and then we'll talk.
And get it done before March 15th, because that's when we renew.
All right, guys. Thank you very, very much for joining us. In the event that you have a question that you didn't feel comfortable asking, please reach out to CAI. I'm sure that they would be happy to pass it on to any of us or be able to steer you towards the correct path. But again, this will be recorded. It will be put up live. So if you'd like to pass it along and just, give it to some other board members, some other industry professionals, and just say it's there, we would greatly appreciate it. And again, thank you for joining us today. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you.